So, Scott, I first wanted to, get to your backstory.
Yeah.
And clearly, you've been doing this for a lot of years.
hmm
And what was the trigger for you to actually do research and, write about how to learn about learning and
Yeah.
doing research around mastery? So, what's the trigger and interest to do this kind of work?
Well, I mean, I have a very unusual story because, like, the right kind of background for doing this sort of book is, I got my PhD in psychology or some social science field, and then I did some like narrow research program where I proved some like very small fact about X, and then I get a splashy book deal and I get to tell everyone I'm from Harvard. I'm not that kind of expert. I don't know whether you could even call me an expert. I prefer to call myself a learning enthusiast, but I am someone who basically I started writing my own kind of personal essays and this kind of stuff on a website when I was 17, which was a long time ago. And one of the topics that emerged early on, especially because I was a college student when I was doing a lot of this writing, was learning how to study. And this was sort of an area where I started getting traction. And as the blog grew, that interest deepened. And after I graduated, I did a few sort of these little what I call little ultra learning challenges or learning experiments. So one of them was learning MIT's computer science curriculum. I did a little project doing that over a 12-month period of time that got me some attention or notoriety or whatever you want to say about it. And then a year later, I did a project with a friend. We went traveling around the world learning multiple languages. And these individual projects kicked off a kind of a deeper interest in cognitive science and the science of learning itself. And so that first culminated a little bit in my book, Ultralearning 2019, that went on to be a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And that was sort of talking a little bit more from a personal perspective. So talking about some of my projects, some projects of people that have really inspired me, and then kind of digging into a little bit of the basic principles of cognitive science, of the science of learning. And more recently, in like the last 5 years, it really deepened into a much more serious research project. So this Get Better at Anything was a little bit less personal, a little bit less about me and what's worked for me, and more just me reading hundreds of books and like almost thousands of papers, trying to synthesize an overall picture of the science of learning. So what do we know about learning? And I tried to be as much of a generalist as possible when doing this book, because I think if there's any advantage of being someone like me, it's not being, the expert on some super narrow fact X that I got my PhD in, but of looking at the anthropologists and the economists and the, psychologists and the cognitive scientists and all these different fields, all these different ways of looking at it, all these different domains, and asking what are the broad things that seem to be true across all these domains. And so, in this book, I'm covering things like mathematicians solving problems to, fighter jet pilot training to science fiction writing to jazz improvisation and all these different kinds of subjects to try to really get as broad a view as possible of how do people learn, what are the basic mechanisms for learning, what are the ingredients that need to be there to make improvement, and what are the things that are kind of like the rate limiting steps that make it hard to improve, which is obviously something we deal with. And so I hope that the audience who is going to read this book is someone like me who's interested in this topic and would like kind of a survey introduction to some of these ideas, some of these big ideas that are important in understanding how we learn.